generative AI track and so forth. And so he's kind of working through that as well. But you'll get an answer. No worries about that. You'll get access to the drive, and you'll be able to access it. With this in mind, welcome everyone to session 2 for the Associate Cloud Engineer certification. For those of you who don't have access to the drive, this is where we are right now, May 5th. The duration for the workload for this week is estimated at about 5 hours, so only half of last week's. And this is our exam review session. It's kind of pushing me to the side here. So now, in terms of workload, you may have seen this if you've received the email. If not, it will be in the email when you receive it. But there are these starred tasks that you have to complete. And in order to get the voucher, you need to complete at least 5 out of 7 Google skill badges. What's a skill badge? Well, everything that has a star is a skill badge, right? So there's, how many are there? 4 and 3. So 7 in total. You need to complete at least 5 out of the 7. And then fill out a form to get your voucher, which you can use to register for the exam, right? So this is all stuff you guys spoke about last week. I'm just showing you the planning again. Another thing that's important here is the exam page, right? Make sure you familiarize yourself with this. This is going to be pretty important because it contains a lot of information for the exam. Particularly the exam guide is what you should pay attention to, because that will give you a detailed breakdown of what's going to be on the exam, but also what portion of the questions are going to be focused on that particular section. So here we have 23% setting up a cloud solution environment, which is what we are going to be focusing on today. Then planning and implementing a cloud solution, about a third of the exam. Successful operation of a cloud solution, also about a third, and so forth, right? So this is the exam guide. Make sure you're very familiar with it. And then once you've done that, take a look at the sample questions. The sample questions are this Google form that will basically kind of walk you through. There are, I think, about 19 questions here. And they're a pretty fair representation of what you'll get on the exam, although perhaps not the level of complexity that you can expect from the questions on the exam. Now, having said this, this is still only an associate level exam. In other words, it's not a professional level exam, and so it's not the most complex exam out there. It's also multiple choice and multiple select. So, I think that you should be good. The official recommendation for this is that you have some experience with Google Cloud, but even if you don't have any experience, you're pretty okay to pass it. So I wouldn't worry about that. But take a look at the sample questions here. Now, in the folder, another thing that, that you'll see is under resources, there is, not over here. Was it on the modules? Yeah, the workbook. So the workbook is something that you should take a look at because it has a lot of different content for the exam, including diagnostic questions that we're going to be taking a look at least some of them we'll be taking a look at in the sessions, how to analyze them, how to approach them, tactics around how to eliminate certain answers, and then focus on the ones that make the most sense. Right, so there are a bunch of diagnostic questions that you can kind of go through and analyze, but we're going to be going through some of them together in the sessions as well. All right, with this in mind, let me pull up the stuff for this week, which is our slide deck that you're going to be receiving after the session as well. And we can kind of take a look at what we're talking about. So the thing the workbook makes use of is this Symbol Superstore case, right? So they use Symbol Superstore as the organization, which is used to illustrate some of the considerations, some of the tasks that you'll have to tackle as part of your preparation, or rather as a cloud engineer, right? So here we'll take a look at kind of exploring the scope of tasks that are involved in setting up a cloud solution environment. Again, this corresponds to your first section here, setting up a cloud solution environment, which is about 23% of the exam. So we'll start by discussing some considerations for how you should set up Symbol Superstore's cloud environment, and then we're going to start going through some diagnostic questions, reviews, study planning, things like that. And I believe we'll have ample time for questions at the end as well. Yeah, audio should be okay for everyone. All right, so let's start with how to set up Symbol Superstore's cloud environment. Now, the Superstore is, in this case, ready to start the implementation of the basic kind of cloud infrastructure layer for their organization. They've taken a decision, they're moving to the cloud. So as an associate cloud engineer, you have been assigned to the team that is going to be helping with this phase of the project. And as these things typically go, the team begins with a planning meeting to decide how Symbol Superstore's cloud structure is going to be organized. What are the outcomes of this phase? Well, the idea of this is that the migration journey should include at least establishing a hierarchy of resources, implementing organizational policies, managing projects and quotas, managing users, groups, setting up those things, or if you already use them in a different environment, how do you connect that to your Google Cloud environment? And then applying also things like access policies, access management. Also, last but not least, you also have to configure billing and monitoring so that you can monitor your resources in your cloud projects. So one of the first things that you'll have to do is set up your resource hierarchy in Google Cloud. And that will depend and vary between organizations because it will kind of depend on the needs and structure of the organization itself. Now, Symbol Superstore plans to migrate 3 applications to the cloud. There's a supply chain application, which will run on virtual machines. There will be a containerized e-commerce application, which will use Google Kubernetes Engine. And there will be a transportation management application, which is going to use Cloud Run functions, so an event-driven architecture to track truckloads, or the truck locations, rather. And these applications correspond to 3 different departments that you kind of see here. Operations manages the B2B supply chain, logistics oversees transportation, the sales and marketing, in this case, manages the e-commerce application. So here in the graphic, you see a possible organizational hierarchy for Symbol. The organization is at the top, of course, followed by optional folders underneath. And I say optional because they are technically not required in the hierarchy in Google Cloud, but they are strongly recommended, right? So I'm yet to see a company that doesn't use folders here. It does make sense to use them to organize your resources, but also to be able to apply policies at the folder level, right? So we have organization, folders, 1 for each division, 1 for each application. And there are multiple projects under the B2B supply chain app folder, or in the folder, if you will, 1 for each environment related to continuous integration, continuous delivery, right? So when you set up a project at the project level, you'll have a dev project, you'll have a staging project, a test perhaps as well, and a production. So multiple projects that are pertaining only to this one application, multiple environments. And you want to set up your continuous integration and deployment in a way that, you know, once it's tested, it's deployed to production and so forth. Now, other apps in the chat would have a similar project structure. This is just for simplicity's sake. We've only represented 1 at the project level. Now, as you're setting up this hierarchy, you'll also need to grant organizational policies. So, for example, marketing might need access to the data in the supply chain system to see if inventory levels affected recent marketing campaigns. And so giving marketing viewer permissions on the supply chain production environment may be a good choice to give them the access that they need. An associate cloud engineer could also be tasked here with enabling application programming interfaces. So in other words, you need to know which API does what and kind of look at the documentation, be able to discern if it solves a certain business problem. And then you'll be tasked with not only enabling it, but also probably maintaining how you access that API. But as you're setting up your projects, you'll go ahead, you'll connect your billing, your APIs, all of these things, right? Now, Symbol Market or Superstore's e-commerce project requires access, in this case, to the Google Kubernetes engine and to a Cloud SQL database, which is a database backend in this case, and we need to enable the APIs for those services so that they can become available. Now, setting up the cloud environment also involves granting members IAM roles, right? So that you can ensure that they have the right access to projects depending on their needs of their job and their role in Symbol Superstore. So for example, a data analyst in the marketing department will need access to, let's say, historic sales data. Where would they get that? Well, from the e-commerce system, right? So that's one of those great use cases for BigQuery, which is Google's cloud-based, fully managed serverless data warehouse solution. So how would you go about providing proper access there? Well, new data analysts would be added to a group. We never provide access on the user level. We provide access through roles, which we attach to groups, and then we add users to those groups, right? So that's kind of the best practice that we need there. So let's say we create a data analyst group, and then new users would be added to that group. The permissions, the rules at the group level is managing those is much easier than keeping track of permissions for individual users, hence the best practice there. Now, data analysts also need access to the data in a data set or a table or something like that. So they would also require a data viewer role at the proper level, at the very least, right? And again, the data viewer doesn't really allow them to do anything with the data except viewing it. Queries in BigQuery are executed as an executable job. So to submit a query, a data analyst would also need the jobs.create permission, right? So that they're actually able to execute them. And that's included in the predefined BigQuery user role. So that means that we would give the data analyst group access to this role in the production project, and that would enable all data analysts to carry out those necessary activities. So as a cloud engineer, you'll need to know how to manage the users, the groups in cloud identity, so that's basically what you use to manage users and groups if you're not doing so with Google Workspace, right? So there are several ways you can do that, but this is one way in which you could achieve it if you're not using Workspace. Observability is another important aspect of this. The observability suite used to be called the operations suite. Before that, it used to be called Stackdriver. It's actually this was actually the name of the company. They used to be called Stackdriver when Google acquired them. At this point, I think it's about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And so a lot of the API methods may still say Stackdriver. So that's where that comes from. Now, these days, it's called Google Cloud Observability. And the whole point of this observability suite is to provide you with metrics and logging services for all the different things you do. Resources, services, projects, everything that's part of your cloud architecture. Now, to monitor metrics from multiple projects, you have to set up a project scope. If in our use case here with Symbol Superstore, if the Superstore's operations department decides to monitor metrics across all the 3 supply chain projects in the, let's say, staging environment project, you'll then have to set staging as a so-called scoping project. And then you'll start adding the dev and production projects as so-called monitored projects, right? By default, each project has its own monitoring scope. But you can extend it in this fashion where you have one scoping project and multiple monitored projects so that you can basically achieve observability across projects. There is one major drawback to this, though, that you have to consider. Now, typically, this is going to be a job for the architect. You as an engineer are more concerned with the implementation. This is something the architect will have to figure out if that's something that should be done, and if yes, what would be the way to achieve it. But if someone has the ability, the permission to access one project, then they're able to see the data across all the projects, right? Because they're monitored projects. The scope is extended. And so that sometimes is a restrictor, is one of those things that organizations don't want to have. And so then you'll have to stick with a single project scope, and you'll have to figure out from an architectural perspective, how do you then discern monitoring metrics between projects? Where do you display them? How do you compare them? And all of that other, all of those other considerations around that. So while migrating to Google Cloud, let's say Symbol Superstore will be moving some of its IT expenditure from capital expenditure and translating that to operational expenditure. What is the difference? Well, if you think about how things were done in the past, where you go and let's say you go to Dell and say, hey, I need, I don't know, 5 racks of computers, right, servers. Then you wait a couple of weeks, you pay them in advance, and then wait a couple of weeks and they deliver it to your on-premise data center. Now, operational expenditure flips the script a little bit because you only pay for what you use or for what you provision, right? So we're moving from capital expenditure to operational expenditure here. And so the different departments associated with the applications have to be configured in a way that they're responsible for the compute and the storage costs that they incur. So that means that we need to create different billing accounts for each group and then link each project to the appropriate account. Now, this may be a task for also for someone from the finance department. Typically, obviously, they will be mostly concerned with costs. So they will also typically be the ones that kind of monitor the billing accounts, how they're developing, what costs are being incurred, and then they will typically reach out to whoever is, let's say, the architect, the project manager, and so forth, or perhaps also to the cloud engineer and ask them, hey, what's happening here? What are these $64,000 a month virtual machines, for example, right? So the department lead in sales and marketing in this case, let's say, expresses a particular concern about the cost of housing its data warehouse in BigQuery, and they start wondering, if my data warehouse is now managed in serverless, my cost probably has to be optimized at the query level, right? How do I store my data and how do I access it? So storage, data storage, and queries. So those are going to be the 2 primary pieces that you have to optimize. So you'll need to set up some custom billing budgets, as well as, of course, alerts for this department. And each department will also need you to set up billing exports so that you can use this to track charges as well. One interesting thing about budgets in Google Cloud is that they don't limit spend. That's something to remember that catches a lot of people off guard, because mostly people think, well, if I have a budget of $20,000, then if my services start reaching, I don't know, 18,000, then I get notified at the 90% level, then I can be safe, because I know that when they reach $20,000, the services will be shut off. Not the case, right? So the budget is only there for orientation, just to kind of give you an idea of where your spend is kind of moving towards in this particular billing period, but it's not going to stop the service. For that, there are quotas, right? So that means that you'll have to set up quotas which cap the usage of a given API at a particular level. So remember this, because that trips up a lot of people. People think that budgets are going to limit spend. That's not the case, right? You use a budget just for orientation purposes. There is a reason behind this. So when Google decided to use budgets in this fashion, they had done a study, and the study showed that if they prevent the delivery of the service, the opportunity cost tends to be higher than crossing that budget threshold and continuing to deliver the service. And so that extra incurred cost is typically smaller than the opportunity cost that the customer would incur by capping the delivery of the service. So that's the thinking behind that. For you as an engineer, it means you need to be more explicit and more deliberate about how you structure your quotas, right? You can set up quotas at a project level, at a folder level. You can cap access to certain APIs. Let's say by default, I think the Google Kubernetes Engine API has a default of 3,000 API calls per every 10 seconds. So if you exceed this, or let's say you start hitting that threshold, you simply have to reach out to Google and say, hey, we're reaching that threshold. We need that extended. So they'll do that for you. But these quotas sometimes are imposed by Google just automatically, just as a fail-safe, so that if someone breaches your account and starts generating cost, they won't be able to at least exceed that default quota of the API, right? Without finding a way to extend it. But also, you have quotas that you can configure yourself. So if you want it to be a little more deliberate about what is allowed in your environment, so that if someone gains access, they're still not able to generate more than what that quota allows, that's a good practice. That's something that you should do. All right, so let's kind of turn to assessing our experience and the skills in this section with some diagnostic questions. Remember, these questions are intended to kind of help you understand, to diagnose, to kind of get you thinking about how to approach these questions. Again, typically the exam questions will be slightly more complex than this. Looking at the study plan, right? This is what we're focusing on. And here's our first diagnostic question. Stella is a new member of a team in your company who's been put in charge of monitoring virtual machine instances in the organization. She will need the required permissions to perform this role. So how do you grant her those permissions? And we already spoke about this, what the best practice is. We typically create groups. We assign roles to those groups. What roles do we have in Google Cloud? There are 3 types of roles. We spoke about predefined roles, right? That's the recommended way to assign roles to groups. But there are also those outdated kind of legacy roles, right? The editor, the viewer, and the owner. Those are way too permissive, right? So we don't tend to use those at all, especially in a production environment. So in a production environment, the official recommendation by Google is stick to predefined roles. The question always comes up, well, what happens if a predefined role, thinking about the fact that Google has another best practice, which is you should always follow the principle of least privilege. That means that you should always provide to users or groups the least possible permissions for them to be able to carry out their job, but not more than that. And what tends to happen in certain situations is that the predefined roles are either too permissive or they're too restrictive. And the actual permission you need is in the middle, so to speak. That's where Google has given us access to custom roles. Custom roles are great. You can use them for those scenarios where you can basically configure your own custom role and pick and choose permissions from predefined roles. That works well. There is one huge caveat, though, and the caveat is that you will have to maintain the custom role yourself. In other words, whenever there is an update to a new product in Google Cloud, which happens pretty much constantly, you are going to have to go ahead and analyze your custom role and see, does it have sufficient permissions for this new updated product, or does it have too little permissions? So you'll have to adjust it yourself, in other words. Predefined roles, you don't have to do that. Google does all the maintenance for you and ensures that there's a compatibility there. So once a role is provided a certain, is applied to a certain group, those members have that role, and that will be maintained across product updates. So assign Stella the role's computer viewer role. So she is a new member, right? She's been put in charge of monitoring. Should we give her the viewer role as a user? Probably not, right? As we said. Most of you already pointed out C, and this is also the correct answer. So we add her to a group in the organization, and we bind the group to the roles compute viewer. Now, identity and access management is also extremely important because it allows admins to basically determine who can do what on what resource, right? That's the whole point of these permissions. So you should be familiar with how IAM works. Here's one question about hierarchies. So how are hierarchies organized in Google Cloud? So from top to bottom, how does this flow? And I see most of you are pretty unanimous here with option B. This is also the correct answer. We have the organization at the very top, the folder, the project, and the resource. Here's another question. Is the organization required? Do you have to have an organization to have a Google Cloud project? And the answer is no. Yeah, that's correct. So you don't have to have an organization. You can start a Google Cloud project without an organization. You can connect a billing account. Now, there are certain features that require an organization. So that's when you'll have to decide whether you want to create an organization or not. If you're already a Google Workspace customer, logging into Google Cloud will prompt you to use that same domain that you're using for Workspace to provision your organization in Google Cloud, right? So you can choose to do so. Otherwise, you can create your organization with a different domain as well. Or if you didn't want to use Workspace, but you wanted to manage identity in Google, then there is the Google Identity product. Google Identity sits outside of Google Cloud. That's important to remember and to understand, right? So Google Identity is not in Google Cloud. In Google Cloud, we have the IAM service, the Identity and Access Management service, which is used for what we were describing until now. Cloud Identity is that page that prompts you to log in into your Google account when, let's say, you install Google Chrome, right? Or you open Gmail, and then Gmail is like, wait a second, who are you, right? So it sends you to the Cloud Identity page, you log in there, and you get authenticated and authorized. So Cloud Identity does that. It's a service separate from Google Cloud. Yeah, option B. Now, when you give a user, a group, or a service account a role on a specific element of the resource hierarchy, the resulting policy applies to the element that you've selected, but also to all the elements underneath it in the hierarchy, right? So these policies get inherited downwards. That's important to remember. As you can see, policy inheritance flows from top to bottom. So you can choose at which level to place a certain policy, but remember that inheritance will be combined. So if you have a policy at a project level and at a folder level, then the resources that are in that folder are going to inherit from the folder and from the project. So there you need to remember that a policy that's placed a little bit closer to the object may override, if it's more permissive, it may override a policy that's placed higher in the hierarchy. So this is something you have to constantly think about, right? At the same time, we also have deny policies. Deny policies explicitly tell the evaluation service that this is going to be a no, right? They always get evaluated first. And so once a deny policy, excuse me, is evaluated as true, there's no further evaluation that takes place. So even if there's an allow policy, it gets completely ignored. And that's how you can actually override access to a particular resource low in the hierarchy, which typically would inherit a lot of allow access, but this way you can deny access to that resource, even to people who are owners higher up the chain, right? So that's one way you can override that. Now, every Google Cloud project has attributes, right? So looking at this, let's take a look at a console here. We'll go to console.cloud.google.com. So I have to log in. This is a training account that I don't remember the password to, so give me a second here. There we go. We'll log in. That's the Cloud Identity page, by the way. And in here, we are going to take a look at creating projects. Now, first of all, I have already an organizational policy that's applied to me because I'm not owner of this organization. You'll see the organization here is jellyfish-training.com, and this is the project. This is one of the projects that I have called Agent Space. So I can click on the project picker up there, And then you can see that these are all the recents, the start, or all of them. And you can see how this is positioned. This is our organization. This is each of the projects that we have in this demo account. I can go ahead and create a new project. I won't be able to finish creating it because I don't have the permission for it, but I can do that. Right, so here we already see the first aspect of this, which is the project name. Project name is something that we can create ourselves, right? I can call this My Wonderful Project. And you'll notice that the project ID on the bottom dynamically reflects the name that we just selected, plus some random combination of integers afterwards, right? So it's going to pick up the project name and it's going to make it part of the ID. This is important. It cannot be changed later. This is something the exam loves asking about. I don't know why. It's not a particularly important piece of information, but they love asking about this, right? So what is the piece of the project that you can edit only while you're creating the project? Well, it's the project ID, right? So you can edit it and you can say, no, I actually want this to be called, I don't know, Superman, Starfish, and then that will be our identifier afterwards. You can have lowercase letters, digits, or hyphens, and it has to start with a lowercase letter and with a letter or a number, right? So a couple of restrictions there. The organization, if you're a part of multiple organizations, you can select the correct organization here and the parent resource. So I'll click Create Now, and it will create this My Wonderful Project, and I can select it, right? So now we have the My Wonderful Project over here. So again, we have the ID and we have the name. What else is required here? So the ID, the name, there is a project number and a project category. So which can be changed. So you can change the point in time, right? You can actually go and change My Wonderful Project to whatever you want, but the ID is going to stay the same. It's only, you're only able to edit it while you're creating the project. So that's something to remember. In this case, which Google Cloud project attributes can be changed? The question does not specify only during creation, because if it said that, project ID would be the correct answer. Here, we assume that it's at any point in time, and so it's the project name. Now, each project also has a project number. However, we don't typically concern ourselves with the project number because it's kind of a useless piece of information to us. It's an internal Google name that they use themselves to manage the projects internally. The one case where you may be required to actually provide a project number is if you open a support ticket and they ask you for something like that. In those cases, a name and an ID typically suffice, but they may ask you for a project number, and so you'll fish it out from the settings of the project, and that's about all you need to know about the project number. Jane will manage objects in cloud storage for the Symbol Superstore. She needs to have access to the proper permissions for every project across the organization. So she needs access to every project across the organization. So what are we going to do here? All right, so I'll give you a little bit of a time to think about this. So remember, the best practices, we need to have a group, right? We don't just provide roles to individual users. That's nonsense. And so assign Jane the roles object creator on every project. So that means going one by one through the projects and assigning that role to Jane. That just sounds ridiculous just by reading it. Assign Jane the roles viewer on each project. Again, not. Assign Jane the roles editor at the organizational level. Absolutely not, for obvious reasons. And so yeah, D is the only answer that would make sense here. Also, just by starting the first part of the answer, just assign Jane the role, or assign Jane the role, or assign Jane the role. That's the only thing you need to read to know that that's a wrong answer here. Just by reading add Jane to a group, that already tells you that that's the correct beginning, right? So you can very quickly analyze the answer there and find the correct one. So when an organization policy is set on a resource hierarchy node, all the descendants of the node inherit the organization policy by default. So if you set an organization policy at the root organization node, so at the very top of the company node, basically, then the configuration of restrictions defined by that policy is going to trickle down. It will be passed down through all the descendant folders, the projects, and ultimately all the resources. When we, as I said earlier, when a child node inherits organization policies based on list constraints, the inherited policies are merged and they are reconciled with the node's organization policy. So in this list policy evaluation, remember, again, deny policies always take precedence. They basically discard anything that evaluates to allow. Now, organization policies that are derived from Boolean constraints, a yes or no, they don't merge, they don't reconcile. So if a policy is specified on a resource node, that true or false value is used to determine the effective policy there, the Boolean value. So here we have another question. You need to add new groups of employees in Symbol Superstore's production environment. You need to consider Google's recommendation of using the principle of least privilege. So what should you do? I'll give you a second to think about this one. All right, looks like we're mostly hovering between A and B. One C there, another C, but mostly it looks like we're moving towards B as the correct answer. All right, so let's analyze them. One of the tactics of analyzing questions and answers is to, again, as I said earlier, read just the first part of the first sentence and kind of make sure that it makes sense. What they love doing on these exams is they give you the answers, and often you'll be able to kind of find the correct answer within the first sentence of each answer. Sometimes the first sentence will be exactly the same, and so obviously in those cases you can continue reading so that you can make sure that you find the correct answer. So in this case, grant the most restrictive basic role. So just by reading this, basic role by default is not something we grant, right? It's not a best practice. You can do it, but it's definitely not a best practice. It's one of those things that is an anti-pattern. What is a basic role? A viewer, editor, owner, and a billing administrator as well. So those are the four basic roles. We definitely don't want to grant any of the basic roles to the group of employees, right? And so grant restrictive basic role, so make them viewer basically to most services, and then grant predefined or custom roles as necessary. That is not the best practice. The best practice is the opposite. So grant predefined and custom roles that provide necessary permissions, and grant basic roles only where needed. Actually, never, right? Just ignore basic roles altogether. I mean, you can use them as something like a development project, but definitely not in production. And so B here is seems like the most promising one. C, grant the least restrictive basic roles. Again, basic roles immediately discarded. And here we have grant custom roles to individual users and implement basic roles at the resource level. This may seem like something that you would select because it's kind of sounds like it's the most restrictive, but the best practice is to stay away from custom roles as much as possible. Always try to stick with predefined roles as much as possible, and then whenever you notice that they're too permissive or don't have the correct amount of permissions, then go to a custom role. But be very, very diligent with custom roles, because the more custom roles you have, the more you have to manage, the more you have to keep in mind, you have to document, you have to train people, and so forth. So the correct answer, as most of you here said, is B. Yeah. All right, so I kind of already spoke about this, but we have basic, predefined, and custom roles. They focus on the can do what part of who can do what to what resources. All right, so basic roles, as we said, owner, editor, viewer, they existed prior to the introduction of the identity and access management service in Google Cloud. So we didn't have predefined roles, and that's when we used to use basic roles, obviously. But then, of course, predefined roles were introduced, which provide a far more granular access for a specific service to the API. They are managed by Google Cloud, so obviously best practice, and I already spoke about the custom roles. So here we have one, the operations department at Symbol Superstore wants to provide managers access to information about virtual machine usage without allowing them to make changes that would affect the state, right? So you assign them the compute engine viewer role. Which two permissions are they going to receive by getting the viewer role here? So here, this is a multiple select question. You'll get a few of these on the exam as well, where you have to pick out a couple of the answers. Yeah, looks like we're very unanimous in the answers here, mostly A and B. Those are the correct answers here as well. A and B, the viewer can perform read-only actions, makes sense. So read-only actions don't affect state. And then we also have get, right? So get is also a read-only operation. So the viewer does have that permission as well. Anything else would change state. So create, update, set IAM. Only the owner, by the way, can set the IAM policy on a service. So you would need the owner role to be applied for that. So there's additional courses here, additional reading that is available to you, also links to the documentation. Make sure you take a look at them. I know that there's already quite enough in what we saw earlier here with the workload. I think I closed it, but there's quite a lot with the workload for this week. There's a lot with the labs that you have to do anyway, but some of these things are important, so make sure you at least take a look. You should be comfortable with the roles. Now, moving on to the next section, which is billing configuration, right? So this is the last part of content that we're going to focus on as part of this week. So the activities here would be creating one or more billing accounts, linking projects to a billing account, establishing a billing budget and alerts, and exporting this type of information so you can visualize it somewhere. Our billing accounts apply to projects in Google Cloud. Here you have to pick two answers. All right, so we're mostly moving towards C and D. Yeah, those are the correct answers, C and D, right? A billing account can be linked to one or more projects. Typically, that will be the case. You won't necessarily have a single billing account for every single project. And then a project and its resources can only be tied to one billing account, right? So those are the two answers that are the correct ones here. Now, billing accounts are important because they are what you need in order to sometimes activate certain APIs. Without an API, you won't be able to. Without a billing account, you won't be able to activate them, and so, or you'll have to use the free quota that's assigned to that service. But obviously, that's not a kind of a reliable way to develop systems. So you will eventually have to link a billing account to the projects. So here we have Fiona, who's the billing administrator. That's the fourth basic role for the project associated with Symbol Superstore's e-commerce application. Jeffrey, who's the marketing department lead, wants to receive emails related to budget alerts. He should have access to no additional billing information. So in other words, Jeffrey only wants to be notified, kind of getting emails that are related to budgeting alerts. So that's that situation that we described earlier. We have a $20,000 budget. We reach 18,000. Jeffrey here wants to be notified that 90% of the budget has been used. So how would we approach this? Okay, we're kind of moving between A, B, and D. Various answers here. We can give a second for everyone to kind of go through the question. So the correct answer here is B, right? So we're going to use cloud monitoring notification channels and send Jeffrey an email alert. This is actually one of the core functions of the monitoring service, is that it allows you to configure budgets, but then also configure custom levels at which you want to be alerted. By default, you'll get a notification at 50, 75, and 90% of your budget utilization. But if you wanted to have one at 37%, you can do so. And in terms of channels, which you can use for the notification, obviously email is available there, just like text, but also more interesting channels like a Teams group or a Slack channel or a Google chat, right? Obviously, any type of email, a text, a push notification. It's actually one of my favorite use cases for the Google Cloud mobile applications. Was exactly this, right? I want to get a pop-up notification, a push notification when my budget reaches a certain threshold. That's probably the easiest way to get notified immediately. And there is going to be a little bit of a delay in the notification, but it's not going to be anything dramatic, right? So let's say when you reach 90%, you'll get a notification, depending on what your burn rate is, a few percent after that. Now, I typically recommend that people configure their first alert at 25%. And you may think this is too low. So why do it at 25%? The reason for this is that you want to make sure that your burn rate or your utilization rate kind of matches your expectation for the month. So if your budget for the month is at $20,000, a quarter of that is obviously $5,000. So within the first week, you would expect to have used about that, right? For your services for the project. And so you can kind of use that as an early indicator of whether or not you're on track or you're overspending, and then adjust so that you know that, okay, it looks like we had a runaway virtual machine or something like that, or we had a Terraform script that created a virtual machine, whatever that may be, or we have a bunch of APIs that are just running, nobody's using them, someone activated them when they set up the project and they're just generating costs just because they're activated. Now, in terms of managing billing configuration, there's a lot more in terms of resources, fundamentals here. Of course, the core infrastructure is what we're talking about here. That's the course, but there's also certain modules from other courses as well, as you can see, as well as links to the documentation as well. Creating, editing, deleting budgets, budget alerts. It's important to be familiar with those things. Remember the difference between a budget and the quota, right? So that's those are the two mechanisms that you may be quizzed on. The budget does not prevent you from spending more money. The quota does. All right, so lastly here, rounding things off, we're basically almost done with the content here that we have for this week. In terms of knowledge check one, which Google Cloud interface allows for scripting actions in a set of command line executables, right? So these are a little bit more kind of speaking to the developer part in the name of the exam. And Yeah, I think most of you got this one correct. It's option B is the Cloud Shell. The shell is the thing that will allow you to script, is great for scripting actions. Now, what is the lowest basic level role or lowest level basic role that gives you permissions to change the resource state? This is actually an interesting question. So remember, we are changing state here, right? So from our earlier conversation about this, the viewer is not going to be able to do that. And so editor, administrator, and owner, all of those can do it, but we need the lowest level. So what's the lowest level basic role that can do that? That's the editor. Yeah. All right, folks. So this basically covers everything that we kind of had to go through in terms of considerations for today. If you have any questions, anything at all about what we covered here today, feel free to ask. We still have plenty of time. And yes, Zane, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, how are you? The thing is, it's a little frustrating for me. I've been like I filled the form a couple of times. And it's a bit related to the Google Drive access, by the way. I have been trying to that for like last week. I've been filling the form every single day, and I did like send I think Shauna as well. I haven't gotten back any response, and I think falling behind. So I don't know what to do, and I need the certification watcher as well. So I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah, I get your concern. It's a valid concern. This is, I mean, Shuna can answer this question better. But
I think a lot of people
as
have
a,
the same sort of
yeah,
complaining
go
with this.
go ahead.
Yeah, just a second. Let me check it for Zen. I'll just check.
And that's pretty much it. If anyone wants to talk, they can. I'm done. Thank you. If you can resolve this issue, I would really I can really appreciate this. Thank you.
Zen Ahmed, that's your full name, right?
May I ask a question in the meantime?
Yeah, you can. Let me just pick up one interesting question that I saw here in the chat before that from Avijay, which is, what is the project category? There is no project category. So that was kind of a leading option there that was presented to you that you can simply ignore. No project category. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, hello. You showed us the slide where we can see the progress. It isn't very clear exactly on what portal, what URL could we go to see that? Like how many labs we completed, what's left?
Oh, so basically, if you take a look at this document, I know those of you who don't have access to the drive, you probably don't have access to the document. But the way this document is configured is each of these required parts of the workload for the corresponding week is a link. So when you click on the first link, which is implementing cloud load balancing for compute engine,
For some reason.
this is the, you cannot hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. So this will lead you to the platform, right? This is skills.google, or Google Skills is called these days. It went through multiple different names in recent years. And this will be what's required for you to complete that lab. Now, notice here, oh, and by the way, let me show you this as well. Yeah, so this will be the drive that you'll have access to. You'll see the resources here. There's the kickoffs deck. There's also something here called Google Skills Activation Step by Step, right? So this is something that you have to go through in order to gain access and provision yourself in the Google Skills platform if you've never used it before. If you used it before, then you already have an account and probably know how these things work. But this is what you have to pay attention to. Now, the link to this is in an email that Shunak sent last week. And you should be able to find it somewhere in your inbox. And that will lead you to the drive. And in this drive, you can find all the information that you need to activate your account for this. Now, once this is activated, you should have...
Just to note for everyone, that I just realized this, that step-by-step guide for everyone who already has an account, still do that, because that's how you get your 400 credits. I'm just now seeing that.
Yes, excellent point, Cameron. The thing about this is that you'll notice that we have a bunch of labs here, right? So lab, and another one here, which is a challenge lab, right? So what is the deal with this? Well, these labs are pretty straightforward. What I mean by this is if you open it, let me just open this lab. The way this works is you have a timer. So you'll start the lab. I don't know if I have credits with this account, but let me launch with tokens. I don't have tokens either because this is a trainer account and I don't have any credits about this. Well, anyway, so you'll start the lab, and for this you need credits, right? And each lab costs a certain amount of credits, and that's why you're given a certain amount, about 400 credits for the entirety of the course, because each lab will cost you something. Now, typically the way this is calculated is 400 credits gives you roughly about twice the amount of credits that you need to complete all the labs in the entire course. So you should be very comfortable in knowing that you have plenty of credits to not only do these labs once, but even if you get stuck and have to redo a lab, you can redo it as well comfortably, and you'll still have plenty of credits left afterwards to redo labs. I also recommend that you redo labs that you've done, if you have the time, of course. I know that there's quite a lot to cover here in terms of content, and there's a pretty significant workload. But if you do find a moment to go over a lab again, do so. One thing that I will say about this is, before you start using credits to redo labs randomly, make sure that you've passed, all of these start labs, because they're the requirement that you need to have covered, right? So 5 out of these 7 start labs you need to pass in order to qualify for the voucher. So use your credits to pass these start labs first, and then start looking at redoing labs.
So do you recommend to skip those that are not start, like the basic ones, the ones that are straightforward? Do you recommend to skip them in the beginning?
Yeah, I wouldn't say skip them. So setting up a network load balancer is pretty important. So you need to know the difference between network load balancers, application load balancers, when you use what, right? One's operate at layer 7 of the OSI model, the other one's at layer 4. So they are actually used for very different use cases, and the labs will kind of take you step by step through configuring these things. So they're pretty important, right? All of these things. Load balancing is a huge topic in general, as I'm sure you've already either know or you've kind of gathered by this point. And so I would recommend go through all the labs. There is another reason why I would recommend this. So if you take a look at this first lab here, let's open it up.
But don't we need to complete all of the labs to get the skill badge?
So I think that's the case. I think you need to go through all 4 labs to get the skill badge. I'm not quite sure if you only needed to complete the actual challenge lab or all the labs. I think it's all the labs. Now, if it's only the challenge lab, then you're welcome to start with that if you're comfortable with the concepts. But the other thing that I wanted to point out is that these regular labs, they really do a lot of hand holding. So they take you step by step, run this, copy, paste, run this, copy, paste, right? So it's all there for you. You basically have to make sure that you understand what's happening here, right? You need to know what the script does, and that's basically it, right? It'll just take you through these things. The challenge lab is a challenge lab for the reason that it doesn't do that. So it will basically give you a set of instructions and tasks, and it will say, now go ahead and do it. right? So you have 3 tasks in this challenge lab, where you have to create a web server instance. You have to create several, 3 in fact, as you can see. These will get dynamically populated when you click Start Lab, so don't worry about that. It gives you the tags, the machine type, and all these things, but it doesn't really walk you step by step. You know, click here, and I'll click there, and I'll select that, and so forth. So that's the thinking behind it. Now, if you're already comfortable with this, by all means, go ahead and just go for the challenge labs. But I would recommend, if you have the time, go through all the labs. And if it is indeed the case that you have to go through all of these 4 labs to get the star, right? You have to complete all of them, then yeah, of course, you have to complete all of them.
Do we need to do all of them to get the voucher?
No, to get the voucher,
Because the
you
course
only
is-
need to complete
Wait.
5 out of 7 skill labs.
Right. But once you go to the input, so go to the first one, the implement load balancing. Do we need to do all of the labs in that course, or just that one lab, the challenge lab?
Yeah, that's what I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you have to complete all of these
Let's go to the top.
get
It's the same name, so it's confusing.
the star. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have to complete all of them or just this one. Obviously, for sure, you need to complete the challenge lab.
Right.
But I don't know if it's all these.
I completed all the labs including challenge lab, but I'm not able to claim credentials. I'm not seeing the skill badge for that.
It should be there. It should be there. So if you've completed all of these, so think of this as a course, right?
Yeah.
You can see that it says course over here. For you to get the credential, you need to complete all of these. That goes
Yeah.
without saying. Now, the question is, to get the star, do you need to complete all of these labs? And that's where I'm not sure, right?
Well,
So
more
maybe
so
should
the
I-
voucher, not the star.
Yeah. So if you wanted to claim the credential, it should appear if you've completed all these 4. So if you have a check mark here and here and here and here, you should be able to get it.
It's
not
not.
sure.
And if you see the chat, the Isael Melendez also has the same question that he or she is not
Okay.
able to claim the badge.
That's really strange. So if that's the case, you can reach out to support. You can contact them over here and report this as a problem, because that's managed by a different Google team. I also don't have access to your lab environment, so I'm not able to kind of take a peek and tell you what's going on there. But it should be able to, actually it should automatically be displayed, and you should get your skill badge here automatically once you complete the challenge lab for sure.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. That's a good question by Gabriel here, shedding a little more light on billing accounts. Yeah, so billing accounts are fairly straightforward. So if we kind of go to the console here and we kind of investigate billing, so this is my trainer account here, and I have multiple billing accounts, right? One of them is linked to this project, to this Jellyfish Training Demo 12. I can go to that billing account, and I can start looking. Everything here is in British pounds, just because our headquarters is located in London. So that's how the billing is done. And that's another thing, right? So you don't have to stick to a particular currency. It's all about where your billing account is located administratively. It doesn't really matter where you are around the world. And so that kind of shows you what we've created and so forth, right? There's details on reports. Remember, the whole point of this is that we want to make sure that we can break this down and make sure we know which resource has generated how much for what, right? So here you can see someone was making a demo with Cloud Spanner, and that created kind of the biggest chunk of usage costs in the beginning of May. This is today. So again, Spanner is running, generating some costs in the background, apparently. And there's a forecasted cost as well, right? So that also helps you figure out, am I on track here, or is this something that is maybe running wild? And, my colleague just forgot to shut down a Spanner instance. That's actually something that you definitely don't want to do, because Cloud Spanner can be pricey. And then you can see notebooks, Apigee, Compute Engine, £2 for that, networking, and so forth, right? And that kind of gives you an idea of how you've been spending. And you can, of course, filter here. You can look by services, by sub-accounts, by folders and organization, kind of break everything down, which makes it very handy to figure out where you're spending money. This is where you'll go ahead and configure your budgets and alerts. You'll create a budget. In this account, I don't have the permission to do that. So if I create a budget, it will be basically just for me. I know pretty much everyone else has already configured budgets, especially the people who care about how much we're spending. They have their own budgets, but in this case, you'll go ahead, you'll configure the scope, the time range, the folders and organizations. So do I want this budget to be across a single folder, single project, or the entire organization? So what is the scope, basically? And then labels, if I wanted to assign a label, so, you know, whatever that may be, like, let's say the developer, and then I could say Gene, right? So this way we know that whatever is attached to this folder organization, whoever is generating the cost is Gene in that context. So let me go ahead and delete that. So, you know, so you can add labels yourself, but then under amount and action, there's just basic configuration after that. And that's about it. So hopefully that gives you a little more perspective on that. Stephen, do you have a question?
Yeah, my question is for Shonak. I've asked for access to the Google Drive, but I haven't gained access. So I hope you can add me and give me access.
Okay. When did you fill the form, Stephen?
Last week, the first class, I filled the form, and even severally, I sent a request for access. When I clicked the link, it would ask me to request access.
Let me check for Stephen.
So it will be.
Yes, as I can see here, you requested for it on the 29th of April, and the request and the access was provided on the next day itself.
Oh, really? But I clicked the link, but it's still asking me to request access.
No, that means might be you are using your company laptop for the personal email. That might block the access. So
Oh, should I use my personal account?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, this Krishna here. I have the same issue. Like I submitted the request. I am using my personal email ID, but still, it's like you don't have access. Even I submitted the form as well.
Krishna
Gurla, GURLA.
Let me check. Krishna Gurla. Okay, you just submitted it right now, so you will be getting the access within the next 24 hours.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Sean. This is Shiraz. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. My question is, real question is not related to the topic. So my Gmail ID, it has my date of birth. So when I'm gonna apply for my exam, right, it asks for the photo ID. It should match with my Gmail ID and date of birth. So where can I change it? How I can change that? Is there anything?
I'm so sorry, but we are not the right person who can help you out with this. You will have to reach out to the Google team, like the ones who are responsible for creating and changing details for your Google account, like the Gmail. So we cannot change it from our end.
Yeah, that would probably be. Have you tried in the settings of your Google account?
Yeah,
you can manage your It's not available.
Yeah.
Well, there should be a support option or something like that, because we wouldn't be able to do that. That has to be someone from that particular department who does that.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Manoj Bhagatla. I'm having the same issue. How do I access the drive and also the credits? I have signed up for both my personal account and my corporate account. So how do we check that it is there if my account is set up correctly?
Manojava
Yeah.
Bharadwaj, okay. I can see I have provided you the access on your personal email. Yeah, it is already provided.
So how do we see that? How do we get to that drive? Is it possible to share the link?
Yes, sure. I'll share the link. Just a second.
Hey, Shanak, while you do that, quick question. How do I see my credits?
Your credits, it will be there. Once you log in, you can go to the settings and you can check your credits over there.
I
They'll-
logged in using both.
They'll be over here.
Yeah, it says 0 credits. Do I need to receive an email that I have received so many credits? Is there a confirmation? Do you know what the subject of that email is?
There's no confirmation email once you get the credits, but you will be able to see that on your profile. Like
Yeah,
once
I logged in using both. I was not sure if it was my personal email that I'm supposed to use or work email, and both accounts say 0 credits.
Okay. And did you complete the lab which was mentioned in
Yes.
the and is the progress showing 100 on 100?
Let me check. So what's the best way and easiest way to check that?
You can go to the lab that is mentioned in the email.
Okay.
And on the right hand side, once you open the lab, you will see the progress report.
Okay.
Gene, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I just want to ask, like in the final exam, when in the troubleshooting questions, do we need to like literally memorize the script as well, or like, or
No.
are we going to get those kind of questions where we need to literally have those?
Yeah, that's a good question. So scripting is one of those things. I'm just zooming in here so people can, if you haven't gotten the email, this is what you can look for. This was sent by Shunak. Now, regarding scripting, so since this is the associate developer exam, you are expected to feel somewhat comfortable coding. Now, the exam, however, is not really going to test you on coding, right? It may show you a piece of code or maybe a configuration of a shell script and then ask you, based on the script, what's happening or what would you add or what is the best practice that's being ignored here, something like that. But it won't ask you to actually write code. Now, I have seen in this exam sometimes there is a question and there are 4 answers with each answer is a separate script, like a shell script to, let's say, create a VPC or something like that, or a machine, something like that. And so the script will say which of these, or the question will say which of these scripts or which of these versions of the same script is going to satisfy the following requirements. So that's basically where you need to be comfortable at least reading the scripts and knowing what the scripts are doing, so that you can recognize which answer is going to do the thing that the question requires. That's really the extent of it. That's probably the most complex code-based question that you'll get.
Hey, Gene, I had a question related to the lab, the first lab, I think, that you had shown. So the load balancing. So I did all of these labs, but certain things were not clear to me, like the tags, the image family, the project family. So those tags, what is the significance of those? How do they tie all the configuration objects so they work together? So it wasn't clear to me from doing the labs, but
yeah, that's a good question. So typically when you have a load balancer, think about what the purpose of it is, right? So it sits in front of something kind of processes a bunch of load and distributes it, right? And if you have multiple backends, which typically you tend to have, or you may have different types of backends. You can have a service, and then you can also have a managed instance group or something like that as a backend. And so in those cases, you need to be able to group these resources together to be able to target them with rules. And so that's where these types of tags come in handy, so that you can tag each resource, and this way it becomes part of a group that you can target, right? So that's basically the thinking behind it. What else did you have as a question there?
Yeah. So would there first of all be questions that related to that? So
yeah, there may be a question that asks you about load balancers. I mean, I'm pretty sure there will be. For you as an engineer, because typically the architect exam really loves diving into the details of kind of discerning between different types of load balancers. The engineering exam is slightly, it's an associate level exam, so it's not quite as deep in the weeds of configuring these things. But you should know what the main purpose of a network load balancer is versus an application load balancer, and how they tackle particular problems. Now, one thing that I want to point you to, let me see here, load balancer, there was a nice little graph that I had stolen from the documentation for one of the slide decks that I had. So let me see if I can pull it up. It's in the official documentation. This is not it. And it basically shows, wait a second, cloud types of load balancers, load balancing overview. Yeah, this is the docs. Okay. There we go. So it's this this breakdown. This should be a little bit helpful in kind of showing you what types of load balancers they are and what they're typically used for. All right, so you can see at layer 7, we have application load balancers. They're internal and external, and then based on that, they're split in regional, or cross-regional, or something like that.
okay. So, but and this is great. Like, if I can have a link to this, that would be awesome. My question was related to the exam questions, and whether there would be anything, or do we need to know different commands, sequence of commands, and the parameters that we need to specify for setup?
You are kind of expected to have worked at least 6 months with Google Cloud in an engineering capacity. So typically what's expected of you is to have run a bunch of scripts, to be able to create a virtual machine in the shell, to be able to instantiate a virtual private cloud and instantiate a load balancer in the shell, or to be a little more realistic, probably with a Terraform script, because the exam may ask you about a Terraform script as well. Terraform is first-party citizen here, and when it comes to infrastructure as code, contrary to what some other clouds do, like AWS with CloudFormation and so forth, Google adopted Terraform as the primary tool for infrastructure as code a long time ago. So it's standardized on Terraform in a lot of these infrastructure as code and CI/CD scenarios. So yeah, you may be shown a script and asked to evaluate it to see what the problem with it is. Of course, A, B, C, D, everything is multiple choice. Or you may be asked, hey, which of the following scripts achieves the following goal? And then they'll ask you that. Now, again, it's an associate level exam, so they won't ask you, they won't show you like a super long script that asks you to evaluate, hey, is the creation of the VPC here correct, and the subnetting and all this other stuff. That's more the professional level exams that do that. But this may ask you something like that, a version of those types of questions. So yeah, I would test those things, make sure that you feel comfortable with configuring scripts and running scripts in the shell.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Jin. I have the budgeting and question. So my understanding is that budgets do not stop the limits. They just here for informative, and actual quotes do that. So what's the like actual workflow practical to, let's say, limit spending of 1,000 per month across all services on a, let's say, organization or folder level? So what are the like realistic workflow for that?
Yeah, the realistic workflow is partially what we just saw here. You'd still go to billing and you'd still set your billing accounts and you'll set your budgets, right? The budgets are important and alerts are also important. So you'll do all of this. You'll create your budget, you'll set up your notifications, your notification channels. All those things are important here. Also look at the cost estimation tool. What is the cost estimation tool? It's this thing, the pricing calculator, right? So if you're an architect or an engineer, you're probably going to have this tab opened just permanently, essentially. Typically more the architects, but engineers as well, where you can start estimating the costs for this. So when you're starting with implementing a particular system, you'll go to estimate and you'll say, okay, it's going to be a compute engine instance. And by the way, the generative option up here is new. But let's say you say, okay, I'm going to have 4 instances with a total instance usage time, certain operating system like Ubuntu Pro, for example. So that means you need a license for that. The provisioning model is regular. The machine family, general purpose, and N series in this case. And you can kind of configure how many virtual CPUs and how much memory you want. And that will be reflected in the price. Then you'll continue and continue adding basically additional things to the estimate. Let's say you have a Cloud SQL instance that you want to add. Let's say you have, let's say you want to use TPUs, tensor processing units, because you're building a custom machine learning model. That's also something you can add to your estimate. And then you have a total price that you can share or download as an estimate. The cool thing here is this part. You can link a billing account, right? So that means that your organization has to provide you with access so that you can view your billing accounts, and then you can add them here. Because typically, when you set up projects, you're not going to pay the price of these things that you see online. That's crazy, right? That's way too high. That means that typically you'll negotiate with Google and you'll make use of certain levers that you have available, like committed use discounts and so forth. And typically they want to, win you over as a customer, so they'll give you some discounts to your billing account. And then your discounts will be reflected in the tool over here so that you know exactly how much you'll pay. So you start here, you do your estimate, then you go over here, you build your budgets and alerts, and then eventually when you go to APIs, right? So you go to APIs and services here, and you'll take a look at what APIs are currently activated in the project, how many requests each of the APIs gets, roughly. So you can see what the usage pattern is, and then you continue activating APIs, and then you can assign quotas to each of them as well, right? So you can limit the usage of each of these APIs up to a certain point and not beyond that. So that's your hard quota. That means no engineer in the team is going to be able to use the API if they hit that quota. Or, if God forbid you have a leaked API key that someone has been able to exploit, then they'll just keep hitting that quota so that they cannot run away and generate a $200,000 bill over the weekend, right? That's not something that we want to have.
Yeah, but
so that's
this, I guess, where my question is coming from. So there are like recently a lot of horror stories around, leaked maps keys and getting users getting Gemini code with all those outdated maps keys. And my question was like global spend limit. Is there a same with quotas or budgets, or like it's per service per API?
Good question. So here's the thing. You can set up a global quota as well on the organization level. Typically, it's per API. One thing I will say is, I know that specifically around the Firebase conversation, there's a lot of people that say, but in Google's documentation, it says that Firebase keys can be used. They can be exposed in the repository. So they're not used to be used for API calls in the backend. And that used to be true, and it still is true. What Google didn't disclose there is the fact that for some reason, with an API key that you can use for Firebase, which is just a front-end API key, suddenly, all of a sudden, you can now make Gemini calls if the Gemini API is activated in the project. So what does that mean? It means that you have activated an API in your project, and you didn't set up a specific scope for that API. You simply activated an API, and you said, oh, that API can be used generally in the project. That's not a best practice. You don't do that. It doesn't matter what it says in the documentation. You don't activate an API and you just let it sit there so that it can be used with the scope of the project. That's just crazy. You know what I mean? So instead, you go and you say this API can be used only in the following scopes, and you determine specifically what this API key can be used for. Right? So if you go to API keys here, right? Let me go ahead and enter this again. Under API keys, you can determine what scope each of the API keys can be used for. Let me see where this went. And then you can say this API key can be used, let's say, only for BigQuery, but it cannot be used for for Gemini, for example, for the Gemini API, or any of these things, right? Application default credentials, by the way, is the recommended approach to authenticating yourself, not using API keys, right? So you'll notice API keys are disallowed. I know the Firebase was a different scenario. It was technically approved in the documentation and so forth. But again, there's a lot of best practices that you have to ignore there in order to start being attacked with a vector like that, with a leaked API key. So I understand Google made a mistake there when they didn't publish that in the documentation. That's on them. I expect them to publish a public apology on this and kind of a fix. At least that's what I would expect of them as a developer. But there's a lot you can do yourself to sanitize inputs and to sanitize the scope so that it doesn't get exploited in that way.
Right, that helps. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, guys, we have 2 more minutes. Anyone else have a question?
Is there MFA enabled for these accounts? I'm just trying to understand one aspect, like trying to protect yourself.
Multi-factor authentication?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can activate multi-factor authentication. Google actually makes use of the IAP, the Identity Aware Proxy, which is this thing.
Okay.
So a couple of years ago, Google kind of switched from a VPN to an Identity Aware Proxy, which is part of a multi-factor authentication process that ignores the VPN connection. So Google employees don't use VPNs anymore. Instead, they just connect to the cloud identity page. They type in their credentials, and then a certain evaluation takes place, right? So then they evaluate multiple factors like the IP address, the geolocation, the context of the access call, and all these other things take place behind that authentication, right? So you've gone to cloud identity, you've typed in your password, then you go through this authentication process, and then you connect. Now, you can set up multi-factor authentication to Google Cloud as a user as well. If you wanted to do so, you can do that. But in a corporate context, and also something for the exam that may be relevant, it's good that you brought this up, but Identity Aware Proxy is something you should look at because it's important. Google loves the Identity Aware Proxy. It is considered the best practice. And so consequentially, it does tend to pop up a lot on exams.
Makes sense. I know I don't want to hog time because there are 2 more people having their hand raised, But the last email I got from Shaunak was on 26th. Is that April 26th is the last email I got. So is the one you have shared seem to be with me. So I'm just trying to understand where did that email go? Will it be to my personal email ID or the?
Not sure.
Okay, that's fine. Does it have a date?
Santosh, this is there in the Google group. You can check out the Google group.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. My drive is blocked for us on corporate networks. I was just trying to figure out what's the best way to access it. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
All right, guys. Any other quick questions here? We're basically at time, but
I have a quick question. Is there a way can we do the labs in the UI environment instead of using the commands? Because I had worked in the UI for a couple of years.
in what environment?
So in the UI, like how you create an instance, you can go to the Google Cloud and then go to the compute and then create an instance, and then you can do it, right?
Yeah. You can use the console, I think you mean, right? So basically go over here and go to virtual machine and then just create the virtual machine that way, right?
Yes.
Instead of using the shell. Yeah, of course. You can do that, of course. For the labs, it's no problem.
So is there any tutorials for the labs for the UI as well? Because we are just copying it and then pasting it in the shell. We are not learning anything with that.
No, so the labs typically have only one version, and that's the version you get. Sometimes they'll focus on using the shell. Sometimes they'll focus on using the console. That's why I mentioned earlier, typically if you have credits after you've satisfied that requirement of 5 out of 7 challenge labs, once you've done that and you can get your voucher, I would go ahead and try to complete these labs the other way. So the way that they are not asking you to do it. So whether the shell or the console.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a quick question. So if you have a corporate like organization license, then you don't have to worry about getting voucher points or anything. I can do with my taste the exercise and I still can get the voucher, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. And now the second question is quick. I was doing that exercise for load balancer, the one with the challenge one. And when I'm trying to do it, I'm not sure. Like I saw when you are showing that I see that boot disk option is there, but when I was doing the exercise, there is nowhere I can see that boot disk option to select. So I'm not sure, is this something, am I doing wrong? Not here, the exercise for the challenge one, which is the load balancing on compute engine, where I create my VM, but during that process, I'm not able to see the boot disk part.
Over here, you mean?
Yeah, there is a, I cannot able to, where we have to select, right, the what is the OS and all that, right? We have to pick. So I couldn't able to see the option, but when you were walking through the earlier, I see that, but you went through so quick. I see the boot disk option in your screen.
Oh, I think
VM, but I did not see it. I don't know why.
Yeah, let me see. So basically, if you go to virtual machines, when you configure one, on the left are all the sections that you need to pay attention to. And the boot disk is over here.
And that's what I use. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, just
so
wanted to make sure.
Technically, you could go to change, and then you could, adjust your image to a custom image, to a different operating system, and so forth. But this is the way to do it. Yeah. So you would go ahead and you would configure it under operating system and storage.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You're very welcome. All right, guys. So we're at time. Thank you all for joining me today. Hopefully this was useful. Good luck with the labs and all the workload. Hopefully you get access to the folder soon for those of you who don't have access. And I'll see you back at the same time next week, next Tuesday, same time. Thank you. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.